Okay, so hi, I'm Kathleen Murphy, and as Peter said, we appreciate all of you staying here, and I'm not going to say till the bitter end. I think this has been a great conference, so whatever the opposite of you bitter is, right? Salty, sweet, sour. And we did just want to acknowledge that, as Peter was saying, this is the last session of CATER's embedded track. For our State of the Science. CATER stands for the Center on Knowledge Translation for Employment Research. As a disability and rehabilitation research project funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, most DRIPs, they call us, do this kind of culminating State of the Science in year 4. At the end of year 4, where we think through where have we been, what do we have to say after 4 years, what is the state of the science in knowledge translation for disability employment research, what are other grantees have to say. I see some familiar faces from the previous session we just had with Wendy Strobel-Gower from Cornell talking about her Diversity Partners project. There's some common themes that you'll see moving forward in this presentation from what she's been discussing, or what she was discussing. So this presentation is about a third research track that the KTER Center is doing on looking at what is going on with the VR systems outreach to business, and with a specific focus on members of the National Employment Team. As I mentioned, I'm Kathleen, and I'm here with Amber Brown. Amber was a summer intern for us this past summer. She helped quite a bit on a scoping review we'll be talking about, or she will be. And she's also a PhD student at Virginia Commonwealth University, and really has led what has lent additional value of Amber's participation in our project is her experience as a VR counselor in Mississippi. Another big thank you we have to make is to the Council on State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation, who is a KTER Center partner. And in particular for this research track, we work particularly closely with Kathy West Evans of CSAVR, and she coordinates the National Employment Team, which is all of the VR agencies have one member who is their business point of contact. We are aware that VR is, the agencies are pretty heterogeneous in the way they do business outreach, that there's more going on with respect to business outreach than what is happening with members of the net. But the one value of their approach we're taking is we do have, from a research perspective, a bounded population. There are these 80 net members. So that was one pro. I think also because we were developing this proposal with CSAVR, there was, of course, particular interest in working with their own initiative. And, you know, that development that we did for the KTER Center is really key to any KT. Collaboration is key. Another thing that we do with KTER is we have what we call technical working groups. These are basically advisory boards, would be another name for them. For all of the research projects that we do. Yesterday, I spoke about our work on pre-employment transition services and research on the employment of adults with autism, where we synthesized research on those topics and trained VR supervisors to be knowledge brokers. So for each of those research tracks, we have a different twig, we call it. And they provide us guidance on the research activities. They've helped us to recruit focus group participants, looked at every instrument protocol that we've had, participated in webcasts. They help us do outreach for the project itself. And there's a mix of kind of the demographics of the twigs themselves. We like to include a variety of perspectives. So we have disability-oriented leaders. There's some grantees that are involved, consumers, VR, and the employment community. So for this business twig, we have involved, in particular, Intensity, Kathleen Patrone from the Northwest ADA Center, and she's currently especially involved in WinTech. I think most people at this conference know what WinTech is, right? John O'Neill, who's Director of Employment Research from the Kessler Foundation and has been a NIDLR grantee for many years. I mentioned Kathy West Evans, and John Connolly from CSAVR as well has been involved in the conversations about what I'm going to talk about today and what we've done so far and plan to do in the future with the net. Before I talk about that, I don't really know. Some of these slides I did talk about yesterday morning, but I figured there might be some new people who didn't go to our Knowledge Broker presentation. So I did want to just step back for a second and explain a little bit about the KTER Center itself. So as you will see, the goals of the Knowledge Translation for Employment Research, that first bullet there, so yes, we're working in the field of disability employment research, but we are a research project about KT. So our job is to figure out, okay, great, right? NIDLR's funded all this different research about disability employment. What are effective ways that we can use to promote the uptake of that research? So the KTER Center is not what you might think of when you think of KT as, that we do training or, we do some of that. It's really focused on the grantees in NIDLR's employment portfolio. We are primarily a research project. And the other half of that is, particularly AIR, when they see employment research in the title of our center, they think we do employment research. Clearly, right? We don't, right? We're looking at promoting the uptake of disability employment research. And so we do want, to do that, right? To increase the adoption and use of relevant research in the studies that we do of it. But we want to test strategies that are replicable by NIDLR grantees. So thinking through, a disability rehabilitation research project or a rehabilitation research and training center, what would be feasible for NIDLR grantees that have that kind of budget to replicate? What kinds of things can we try out for them and then they can pick it up and do it? So in our our request for proposals that we responded to in 2015, these were things that were in the RFP that we had to do. One of them, and this is part of really any good knowledge translation, is to think through, okay, you're going to work with a certain group of stakeholders. What are their needs? What do they need to know? What among those needs, what can be addressed with research? We also then, once you figure out, okay, here are basically, the research needs, the information needs that they have. We are a NIDLR-funded center. Our mission is to promote the uptake of NIDLR-funded research. Well, what NIDLR-funded research has been done that can help to address those needs? And then, as I said, once you figure out what your audience needs are, what research there is that can meet that need, okay, what is the best way to put that out there and promote the effective uptake of that? So back when we were working with John Connolly and Kathy West Evans, thinking through, okay, I went over yesterday, if you have questions, like it didn't have to be in the field of ER, but we decided we would. What then would be informational needs that we can know already, even before we start this work, right? So they shared, it's just on the website, or it was at the time, this needs assessment that they had done in 2012 of their members who are directors of state vocational rehabilitation. What are the top 3 issues your agency faces in the next 4 years? So this is 2012 data that we were looking at in the spring of 2015. And there were, among other things, some general concern about human resources, client services, return on investment, actually primarily focused on the agencies themselves, but it did indicate a general need or interest in kind of business and organizational oriented topics. Other formative research we did was from our previous award cycle. We had surveyed 535 VR counselors in 6 states. And one of the questions was, could you tell us about any area of your job where you think any information about evidence-based practice would be helpful to you? So again, kind of trying to marry what is your information need and what in an area that research can address. So we got 457 comments, and they included that's where we got, we were able to make an informed decision about focusing on pre-employment transition services and the employment of adults with autism. But another thing that came out of that survey was that a supervisor who emphasizes evidence-based practice influenced whether VR counselors sought out and used research on the job. So it made a lot of sense, right? If you're going to do something, it's probably because your boss wants you to, right? I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. I don't know if Tim Tansey, he was here in the room earlier today. He and his colleagues had done a similar survey out of the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, and finding a similar finding that the supervisor matters if you want to promote research uptake. So looking at both of these sources of data, among others, we decided in our approach overall to the work that we were going to do, we were going to look at the central role of management and then have these research tracks, which would include business outreach. So again, if you have questions about those other 2 research tracks, I presented on that yesterday, so I'm kind of glossing over some of the details of that, since that's not, I don't think, why you all are here this afternoon. So let's instead focus on that research track on business outreach. So the first thing we did was part of that first mandate, figuring out what are those pressing informational needs that the NET members have. So I was just talking to a member of our audience who is from ICI, Kelly Haynes. And so we were aware that ICI had done a similar survey, but it was a couple of years old, but we did work with that. We looked at those topics. We also, in the previous awards cycle, we had done 13 focus groups with members of what was then called the U.S. Business Leadership Network about what were their informational needs that research could address. USBLN is now called Disability in case any of you are new to the field and know it by that name instead. So taking those, both of those surveys together and looking at it and thinking through, well, okay, where are, starters? What can we put on a survey that are some topics that might be of interest? And we put that together in a survey, and we ran that with the members of the National Employment Team. So 39 of them responded. They represented 37 states. There were respondents from 30 general and 9 blind. So I just thought it's interesting to take a look at the demographics, because it's going to relate to thinking, remember, we've got the whole point of this survey is to figure out what are your informational needs, then we're going to figure out what research meets them, and then we're going to test a KT strategy. Well, okay, this helps to know for your KT strategy, what's going on with your sample, what are demographics that might be related to what kind of strategy is appropriate for them. So looking at these data, unlike when we surveyed the VR supervisors in our other 2 tracks, where Amber presented on that yesterday, what was it, 85% of them have masters, right? So this, or CRCs, this type of VR staff looks a little different than the VR supervisors. So there's greater heterogeneity in educational background. And out of this sample, anyway, granted it's only about 50% of the members, but only a quarter of them hold the CRC. And also related to the discussion at yesterday's roundtable about staff turnover, there's a wide divergence in tenure, right? So 26% of the NET members that responded had worked for over 10 years in their position, never mind VR, right? But the median time was only 3.5 years. So you've got some people who know a lot about their jobs, and you've got some people who are real new. So we're going to, think about that as far as what does that imply for the KT strategy we use with the members of the net. So the survey questions that we asked as far as training needs, the basic STEM was this. It was a 4-point Likert scale you'll see in the next slide. The degree to which you, as a business consultant, you need additional information and training on the competencies, e.g. the knowledge and skills listed below, to better perform your job. So this is the net members' perception of their own training needs. Which again, interestingly, for those of you who were here for Wendy Strobel-Gower's presentation, where she was reporting on a survey of employment specialists, they didn't think they needed any help at all. But if you look at the responses we got to our net member training survey, a lot of them actually agreed. You can see agree or strongly agree over, 100 minus 12.8, right? Agree that they want help with outreach communication strategies to business or relationship building strategies with business. So again, that, it's nice coherence with what Wendy was talking about, that this is something that matters. We weren't asking like she was about coalition building, so that's an interesting perspective that her presentation brings to bear on the implications of whether or not did we ask all of the right questions. These were other top training needs: gathering and using labor market data, business needs assessment methods, and business success metrics, like how do you know that you're doing a good job with a business, like the impact of VR on hiring. Now here's where we get back to, okay, so remember, we've got to promote the use of NIDLR-funded research, all right? So I don't know if there are really studies on some of these, gathering and using labor market data, right? Is that an appropriate training need to address with the research that NIDLR has funded? So that's part of the mission of the KTER Center and the challenge we have in working and developing this particular track of our project. After we did the survey, we did focus groups with the survey respondents. We just said at the end of the survey, hey, do you want to help us look over these results and interpret them? So 6 of them said, sure. And in those focus groups, here are some, sample quotes. We need a way to explain to our staff why businesses operate the way they do. Be great to have tips on how to fairly quickly research a company we're interested in approaching so we can walk in with a sense of their needs. And it's been kind of difficult, this whole issue that we were talking about earlier today in this conference about, the first session with the RSA commissioners, looking at the business metrics and how, the agency itself hasn't yet decided how it's going to measure its outreach to business. We also worked with Kathy to recruit some representatives from businesses that the net works with to talk about these survey results with them. And again, they really hammered home, like they would really like the net members to be familiar with the business, understanding business mission and core values, helping a company understand how VR can help, right? They might think that VR can help with X, Y, and Z, but there might be other things. Like, for example, again, going back to Wendy's presentation, she had a kind of similar structure in that they had interviewed people with business, interviewed disability service providers, and looking at what they thought businesses need. And she said the disability service providers thought that, they want to go in talking about customized employment, and the businesses don't want that. Well, I don't know if businesses are going to ask for something if they don't even know what it is, right? So this quote speaks to that. Like, there may be things that VR can do for businesses, but they will need to, the net members will need to know how to explain that in terms that businesses will find interesting and useful. So again, just the third quote, it's all about it's like almost KT itself. The net members have to think through what is your audience and what are they going to need and how can you meet their needs. Okay, so the point of that activity, that research activity, from the perspective of CATER's scope of work, is then to pick a topic for a scoping review. So we figured out, okay, roughly some domains that would be of interest. What NIDL funded and research findings can be used to address these pressing informational needs. So again, I went over some of this yesterday, so I'm going to skate through a little bit in case you were there, and I'm happy to answer questions. But so a scoping review, you're like, kind of, maybe I've heard of that, maybe not. So what is a scoping review? So a scoping review, the idea is that you're looking at the landscape of a literature. You want to go pretty quickly, not take years and years, figure out what does it look like? How much research is there on perhaps like just this whole domain of VR's outreach to business? What are the key concepts? What kind of research is there? What are the main sources? How good is, not how good, but what types of evidence are out there? So you might look at the extent, the range, the nature of the research activity. Does it make sense to look at one particular intervention that's been researched and really do a full-blown systematic review on whether or not that intervention works? Do you want to just summarize, basically the peaks and valleys of your landscape? And what hasn't been researched? And let me tell you, in this field, a whole lot. So this is where, you want to come in or not yet? Okay, got it. Okay, so we use those net member survey results. We use the findings from the scoping review, from the focus groups, and then we kind of hash through this through several teleconferences with our TWIG members to think through, okay, how are we going to really make this, operational as a scoping review? With a scoping review, you do have like a librarian. She has to come up with search terms. You got to pick the databases. This has to be something that is researchable. So we decided that the objectives of the scoping review would be to figure out what research is out there that has looked at VR's efforts to understand and assess business needs, VR's efforts to market to business and to support business. So we did a database search starting at 1988. The reason why we picked 1988 as a date is because there was an IRI report in that year that was one of the first seminal pieces really promoting the idea of a dual customer approach that VR would take, that the idea that not only are their clients customers, but also that businesses are a customer as well. We got 459 results, 3 more of our stakeholders. 3 additional results came from stakeholders. And we had 2 reviewers looking at the title and abstracts. When the librarian runs it, you get the title of the article and the little abstract. So we had 2 people looking at that and deciding, okay, should we include this or not? Does this article fit? So the first criterion had 3 parts. One was looking to see that it was either research or consensus-based. So that meant you're knocking out like a magazine article, Was it, this is super basic, but was it about helping people with disabilities obtain employment? And because the whole point of this is to build this training for the net members, is there something about this that we can use in the training? So if it met all of those, then we said, okay, now let's categorize this. And it may be that a particular study fit more than one of these, but is it about marketing to business? Is it about understanding and assessing business needs and or about supporting businesses who have already hired people with disabilities? So now I'm going to turn to Amber, who helped with some of this actual coding, and she'll talk more about the scoping review results.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to walk you guys through the process of our study and how we coded our articles. So 2 reviewers reviewed the titles of the abstract after the librarian sent it, and the librarian sent 462 articles, and the relevancy of the articles from the 2 reviewers were compared for interreliability. Discrepancies were discussed and resolved by a senior researcher. And after that process of the title and abstract review, 139 articles resulted from that. And after that, we had a process of having an inclusion exclusion of full text, and 74 articles resulted in that. And when we were done with the 74 articles, when we were done with the 74 articles, we had 3 coders extract the data to use for a scoping review and in a predetermined data charting form. After the 42 articles were selected, we looked at the source of the articles, and not surprisingly, most of our articles came from the Journal of VR. A lot of people in this field published to the Journal of VR, and a few papers were theses. Most of the 74 articles were surveys, so 21. This none section that has 19 articles, these are theoretical, so this included like the chapter, like people who wrote on chapters or who just gave descriptive evidence for the topic of business. And surprisingly, there was only 1 secondary data analysis and not many intervention measures, which is that mixed method qualitative section that has 9. So as far as the populations that were targeted in these articles, most were businesses in general. And for the do not apply or NA section that had 12, this included those theoretical articles. Okay. And what we found were some preliminary themes. So we saw 3 different themes emerge. The first one is understanding and assessing business needs. So most of the VR representatives looked at how to identify employer needs or assessing employment opportunities or assessing workplace climate. In order to establish a relationship with an employer or in order to establish a relationship with the employer, VR professionals need to know the employer's needs. And the next one is marketing to businesses. So taking the time to make those connections through annual events, consortiums, other venues where VR professionals can engage with businesses and relevant stakeholders to discuss issues pertaining to individuals with disabilities and employment. And the last one is explaining the benefits of VR services. So making VR relevant to our business partners. and maintaining relationships, which often included strategies for supporting businesses and communicating needs. Also supporting the ADA compliance and workplace accommodations. Yeah. Oh, no. I think I skipped. Okay, there we go. Sorry, we're switching seats.
Okay, so this is the point we're at in this project, right? So in our proposal, we have this research question. Will research liaisons who receive training and support in the use of research-based practices increase the uptake of businesses to improve consumer labor market outcomes, including employment and retention? Right? So we know, right, that we've got a heterogeneous training population. We know that there is no consensus about how to measure their success in the field. There isn't, there are these 3 indices, indicator 6, but those are still kind of being looked at. It's unlikely that a training that we can support would actually have such distal effects as those indicator 6, such as like labor market penetration or retention. So we're thinking through at this point in the project, how can we best support the members of the net in this dual customer mission in a research-based way? So we know that this track C is going to look a little different than the other 2 tracks did. And frankly, we knew this all along, and that's why it's subsequent to the other 2 tracks that we reported on yesterday, where it was a little more clear. If you're going to talk about the employment of adults with autism, one reason why we chose that area is because our staff had already done 2 systematic reviews on that topic. There is research about that. There are systematic reviews. There are interventions that have been tested. If we go back to what Amber presented here, this is the nature of the research in this very kind of broad topical domain that we were able to try to boil this their training needs down to. I don't want to scroll back again, but we also know there's this general training need on outreach to business, building relationship with business, speaking the language of business. So where we're at now is what we're going to do we are going to do a small training module on the results of the scoping review. And what the scoping review really, though, communicates to the net members is a historiography of the field. There have been efforts. VR has done outreach to business. It has been studied in some way. This is what people have had to say about it. These are the, sources where it's been published if you want to look more. So we will convey that. But the results of that scoping review are obviously not what they need in order to do their job. So what we want to do is take that training need, that research finding that is consistent both with the express training needs that the net members themselves told us and the business representatives with whom they work. And one of the themes of the research is that this relationship building matters. So what we want to do is put together a training for the net members that helps them do that, that's a little more hands-on, that helps them build relationships, think through these engagement strategies. We also know that we've got this heterogeneous audience with respect to experience in the field. So we're going to look at ways that we can build on that, have partly a didactic training that offers content about building relationships with business, but also allows some follow-up group discussion where the more tenured members of the audience can do informal mentoring, at least in a follow-up discussion with the newer members to the net. So we're in the development process. We're still talking to Kathy West Evans about what this training should look like. We will, per our proposal, we will recruit the net members to it. We'll randomize 14 of them to the training. We'll put 14 in a control group. The rest of them will be on a waiting list. We will have a self-paced online module on building relationships to business. There are some resources out there that already have been developed by some of the other RSA-funded TA centers. We're aware of those. We're trying to look for a way to work with them that would work for the net. As I say, we want to have some follow-up group discussions so that there can be reactions to those trainings. We're looking at bringing in some external facilitators who, from the world of business, who can help facilitate discussions among members of the net when they do see those existing training resources, for example. How does that ring true for you? What are ways that we can build on this content? And then one thing that we will continue, which was similar to the other two tracks, is we don't want to just have a didactic training and then just, leave them and say goodbye, but we will follow up once a month with that monthly check-in on an individual basis saying, how is it going? What else can we do to help you? And as far as measures, we will do an enrollment survey for members of the net, and then repeat that measure with them at the end of the 8 months or so, give them a couple of months to do the training, the didactic portion, then the 6 months of the monthly checkups. And we will be asking them to provide us with contact information for businesses they work with so that we can talk to those businesses about how did the training have an impact. So I'm hoping that there are maybe net members or people who work for VR in business outreach in the audience, because we are very open to your ideas about what would be useful to the national employment team, because as I say, we don't have the results. Because that's the conclusion of this presentation, which is kind of a to be continued. And there's our contact information. If you don't, if you don't have your form thoughts, you don't want to share them right now, please do get in touch. But I just wanted, I'll end my talking there. Amber, did you have any other comments? No? So I think we can move into any question and answers or comments or suggestions. We are very welcome. So the question is, did we look at the state agency's comprehensive needs assessments? We did not, and that's a great suggestion. Scoping reviews do often include what they call the gray literature search, where you go beyond just peer-reviewed. And that's not a source we looked at, and I really appreciate your suggesting that. So the gentleman is explaining that the state rehabilitation councils have members from the business community who belong to them, and that's another source of information about business needs. Did I describe that right? They can. So this does get into one thing. We've talked quite a bit with the members of the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center who work on technical assistance to VR staff in this area. And it has been pointed out a number of times that it's not, when you're thinking about VR's outreach to business, it's not all about the net. There's more going on there. And so we didn't turn to those groups because if we're going to do a training for net members, we need to be talking, if we want to look at the impact of that training, we need to be talking to the businesses that the net works with. That said, that's obviously not the only impact that VR could have. The nice thing about it from a research perspective is this is a bounded population. We're looking at the net. There's only so many members of them, and here are, their secondary audience. In the other two research tracks, we look at VR supervisors, we train them to be knowledge brokers, and then we survey the counselors. So in trying to design this research track, we're like, okay, there's the net members. we know some of them work in teams, some of them have staff, some of them don't. So that's why we thought we're going to skip that staff level in, as far as in a research design to look at effects, and we're going to go right to the businesses. That's interesting. So this is, do you mind if it's Kelly Haynes from the Institute for Community Inclusion, and ICI under previous funding did previous work with the National Employment Team, including surveying them about some of their needs and how do they go about doing their jobs. And there's an article, I know, is it in JVR? Yes, it did. And it's actually, it's also, we've publicized it in a newsletter. And so it's nice because it was an open access link. So do you remember what month and year it is in JVR? Okay, so it was published in 2018 in the Journal of Vocational Rehabilitation. It's a nice summary of what's going on with the net. And actually, you got a better response rate. So as far as demographics at the time, you know, there's a more comprehensive look, although it coheres with what we found, you know. So Kelly was pointing out that one thing that would be important to ask is how much time do the net members really have to do business engagement? How much time are they spending out in the field? Because if the idea is that we're going to do this training on building relationships with business, and they know already, ICI does from their previous survey, that they have a lot of other responsibilities, well, how much impact can your training have if they're not positioned to put it into practice? A long time ago, I was in university settings teaching courses, and I was always told, wait 10 seconds. People need time to formulate their thoughts or build up their courage. So, but when it's a Friday afternoon, I think, so I think we can go ahead and close if no one else has anything they want to offer. We do just want to give a resounding thanks, the KTER Center does, to the VR Summit. This has been a really great opportunity. We've really appreciated being able to have our State of the Science and to be able to reach all of you